Under Los Angeles's neon glow, three names, Nicole, Dani, and Carlton, charged straight into a maze of power where every step costs a confession. A deleted email springs back to life, a fuzzy recording redirects suspicion, and a string of matching transfers drags all of Fairmont Crest to the brink. Who is trapping whom? Who will become the detonator that shatters the Dupree name overnight? Buckle up, because right now we're unlocking LA's secret box, where jealousy becomes a weapon, silence turns to tinder, and the hidden puppeteer is about to be exposed. If you're ready to chase the truth to the end, hit subscribe and ring the bell. The game begins now. Los Angeles greeted the three of them with the cold sheen of neon signs and opportunists disguised as courteous gentlemen, turning each of Nicole's steps into a slow sink through a glossy yet treacherous surface. She had told herself this trip was for Dani, for the family, for one last attempt to untangle the knots before they strangled the entire Dupree clan, but the first feeling that pressed against her chest was a long-suppressed fury. The vague jealousy evaporated under LA's dry heat, giving way to an orderly kind of rage. Anger at herself for years of guarding the family only to let a breach gape wide enough to drag them all into the abyss, anger at Dani for the tight-lipped defiance that had pushed the sisters into a snarl of conflict, anger at Carlton for his impeccable polish like the mask of a broker who knows exactly which dial to twist to make the noise roar. At Fairmont Crest, rumors had already begun to boomerang back, deepening the furrows of suspicion on faces that once knew one another by heart. In L.A., those rumors turned into hot wind at her nape, reminding her that every decision from now on would not be a correction, it would be a wager. Dani moved through the city like a dark incision on a bright map, always knowing how to slip into her own shadow. She used closed-door meetings like nested boxes, one opening into another, so that anyone tailing her would lose themselves in a labyrinth of schedules and a desert of facts. But this time, the boxes showed hairline cracks, as if the hand arranging them had been too hasty or some outside force had nudged them slightly askew. The deleted email, now restored, bled like a stubborn stain, an authorization bearing her name, timestamps syncing with a chain of transfers that had already thrown suspicion onto Ted, and a recipient trail that blurred precisely where clarity was needed most. Dani viewed it all with the eyes of someone long accustomed to compromise. Not out of weakness, but from an understanding that the game of power requires constant calibration between loss and gain. Yet every balance has a price, and this time that price rebounded on those closest to her. She knew Nicole was following, knew Carlton wouldn't ignore an open board, and she knew best of all that her silence was tinder giving the hidden hand exactly the spark it needed. What she didn't know was how many invisible cameras clung to her, how many microphones lay in wait to seize the space between words, and how many names stood ready to conspire, turning her misstep into a coup de grace against the Dupree reputation. Carlton entered LA with the poise of a veteran gambler returning to a familiar casino, unruffled by the lights, unafraid of the noise, intent only on listening to the pitch of money flowing through unseen pipes. He opened every meeting with a smile and a studied calm, kept notes in his memory and in short, muddy recordings, and tended his relationships the way one tends plants in a desert, water them just enough to keep them alive, too little to slake their thirst. Carlton had always believed the strongest card was the other side's inner conflict, and here he found a rare pair, Nicole torn between protector and judge, Dani riven between operational freedom and blood obligation. He needed only to press quietly at a fissure and let it widen. The fuzzy audio slipped into the most curious ears, enough to spark questions about who had approached whom, enough to coax a buyer to pay for the missing pieces, enough to dazzle people into believing he was merely a chauffeur who'd taken the wrong turn. In truth, he was measuring the amplitude of Nicole's anger and the weight of Dani's guilt so that when either one stumbled, he could step in as a convenient savior. Back at Fairmont Crest, Andre braced himself against a funder demanding cash for equity, a voice that began polite and gradually bared its teeth. Each call from LA echoed like water dropping steadily onto concrete, not enough to flood, enough to split the seams. Andre couldn't hide his outrage at seeing a year's labor appraised at pennies by an anonymous whisper campaign and hollow numbers, but the worst of it was the tugging sensation of being lured toward a pit dug precisely for men who fancied themselves too clear-headed to fall. Elsewhere, Leslie plucked shards from the chaos the way one picks up broken glass, arranging them so the light refracted at the angle most useful to an old revenge. She knew a clan's pride rarely dies of a frontal stab. It disintegrates from 100 small cuts to honor, money, and kinship. LA was a side stage. The true battle lay in how she could bend the narrative at Fairmont Crest until every text, every photo, every transfer looked like a venomous whisper. Nicole realized she was being reverse-tailed on a night when the city shone as if it were noon. No obvious figures, only impossible coincidences, a third car making the same turn, peeling off and merging again. A hotel doorman greeting her by name before she gave it, a stray email to an address she hadn't used in a year, attaching a map to a cafe where Dani had once met a partner. She understood the message, someone wanted her to trust coincidence, to act on reflex. Nicole's anger didn't erupt in smashed objects, it spread like subsurface fire, eating into each calculation. She thought of the family, of all the times she had shielded others and exposed herself, of the insult of being led by the nose and the hiss in her ear warning that if she let them win this time, the name Dupree would not be salvageable. Fury ripened into the need to seize the initiative. She decided to spring a counter-trap. Craft a bait data packet riddled with errors so subtle only an insider could spot them, scatter digital crumbs in different places on staggered clocks, and switch routes at the last second, anything to force the tail to reveal its position. She couldn't be sure who stood behind it, but she was sure she'd watched their path light up across the map. Just when Dani thought she had the tempo under control, she felt a layer of the script she had never written. The resurrected email put her name on the wrong page of the ledger, the signature too convincing to dismiss without leaving the stench of a cover-up. Meetings meant to seal former partners' lips turned into mirrors reflecting her worst self, a woman using access to guarantee a murky debt, dragging the clan into a bog. Dani boiled at the impotence of language, every explanation sounded like a variant of "I'm sorry." She wavered over Ted, the timing of the transfers, the hours she had vanished, and the prospect that she herself had been used as a shield for a man's hidden hand. The thought cooled her into iron. In that moment she understood how thin the border is between the manipulated and the accomplice, so thin a single ill-lit choice could tip her over. She moved to end any meeting with leaks, shrank her circle of trust to a number so small it was dangerous, reset passwords, slammed every side door shut. But each time she bolted one door, the knock sounded at another, as if whoever was orchestrating it always walked one step ahead along an endless corridor. Carlton felt the pressure change as a plane does on descent. He knew Nicole had switched to offense, sensed Dani was closing off every entrance, and watched the conduits of information start to hiss with static, no longer flowing into his pockets as docilely as before. His anger wasn't about the plan possibly faltering, it came from being forced to reveal another layer of himself he'd kept packed tight as sand. In this game, the one who shows more loses first. He weighed the idea of pushing out one more recording, salted with a true detail only those in the room could know, to seed the feeling of betrayal in a man at Fairmont Crest who had long treated women's trust as a license to ignore risk. Mark one person as a traitor and the rest will scatter. In the stampede, he could sell exactly what he'd come to sell. But that choice smelled like a burnt bridge. Part of him craved it, part of him balked. Burning the bridge could scorch his private escape route. That tug-of-war became the habit of dialing a certain number just to hear 3 rings and hang up, a way of reminding himself that every alliance has an expiration date. Meanwhile, questions from Fairmont Crest pitched and swayed like the shadow of a lamppost in wind. Was the original decision to leave town a carefully baited trap, a forged tip designed to pull all 3 into LA precisely when a data bundle was being moved? Had some intermediary device that Carlton once recommended as a security tool actually served as a door for someone else? Had the person who steered Nicole to the secret meeting come from Dani's team, or been a guide fabricated to wipe footprints from the sand? For every hour a theory survived, trust died by the same measure. Ted found himself weighed and measured by new eyes, Andre fielded questions and voices dusted with doubt. And people who thought they were on the periphery suddenly heard their names read from a list no one had published. Leslie kept fanning the breeze, no need for a gale, only persistence. She knew better than anyone that a stock can begin to crash when a story collapses, and a story collapses when the audience is convinced their beloved character might have betrayed them from the start. Nicole stood at the threshold of an irreversible choice. Push the bait farther, accept the short-term hit to her reputation in exchange for dragging the hidden hand into the light, or fall back into defense and wait for a safer chance that would also offer fewer paths to victory. Rage curled into a blade of surf, slamming against memories of mistakes she'd shouldered for others and against the dread of seeing her family turned into a case study in media warfare. On the opposite corner of the board, Dani tallied the tariff of absolute transparency. Open the books, lay everything bare, let her dignity be torn to keep real power, or keep bargaining in the dark, hoping to slip free before the final bell. Carlton, like a compass needle set next to a magnet, jittered between greed and self-preservation, knowing that if he let his heart soften for a split second at the vulnerability of the very women he was exploiting, he would lose the road. When Nicole released the bait, the city seemed to twitch just slightly, and then return to its usual pulse. The commingled stream of false and true data slipped across servers like small boats threading between massive ships, glinting with coordinates no one could read without the master chart. In another room, Dani cracked open an archive of emails from years past, pulling out messages that once seemed harmless but hid timestamps that could either save or damn her. Somewhere else, Carlton stepped into a multi-level parking structure, went down, then up, switching elevators mid-floor to make sure any tail lost its bearings before he disappeared. At Fairmont Crest, messages kept arriving, calls kept dropping into silence, and the vows of unity thinned like morning mist. None of them believed the endgame was money anymore. Money was just a coat thrown over something deeper. A confession compressed to burst at the most ruinous instant, a stock implosion meant to set off a chain reaction through relationships long propped up by make-believe, a slash at the clan's pride that would force every generation to bow. Anger flowed like molten metal through underground channels, forcing them to pick a side, to own what they had denied, to face the darkest contours of themselves. In L.A., where every story has an invisible director, the puppeteer had already succeeded in the first act. Instead of fixing what was broken, each of their choices dug the obsession deeper. But with the bait in the water, the map glowing with points, and the silence now unbearably loud, they would have to move forward even if the next step was over a cliff. Because sometimes only at the cliff's edge do people reveal their true shapes, and the fight to reclaim the authorship of